A mysterious blast leveled 80 million trees in Siberia, but no crater was ever found. In the summer of 1908, in a remote part of Siberia so wild and untamed that it was barely even charted, a small group of men were hard at work on their research. Well, hard at work might be a generous way of putting it, because what these men were actually doing was drinking vodka, playing cards, and generally enjoying life. Their boss, however, did not approve. He wanted them to be working on collecting data for the Russian government on things like plants and animals and minerals and things like that. But this boss would soon wish that his team had been drinking vodka and playing cards, because what they stumbled across next was far more terrifying than any vodka-fueled poker game. What happened here was one of the biggest mysteries of the 20th century, and maybe even one of the biggest mysteries of all time. And it's called the Tunguska Explosion. Now, let's go back to the beginning to see how it all unfolded. Back in the year 1908, there weren't many people living in Siberia. It was mostly just empty wilderness and home to the indigenous Iwinki people. Most of the world's population lived thousands of miles away and had no idea that something truly incredible was about to happen. Then again, that might have been for the best. On June 30th, 1908, a huge bright fireball appeared in the sky above the Podkamennaya Tunguska River in Siberia. Eyewitnesses who spotted it reported that it was around 10 times brighter than the sun, and that it remained in the sky for several hours. Shock waves from the explosion traveled hundreds of kilometers and shattered windows as far away as 200 miles. The explosion was heard over 600 miles away, and trees were completely flattened in a radial pattern for dozens of square miles. Yet no crater was ever found. It was almost like a massive bomb had gone off, except there was no crater. In fact, it was as if an enormous hand had come down from the sky and smoothed out the earth. And that's not exactly what bombs do. And to add to the mystery, for decades afterwards, scientists couldn't even agree on what had happened. One theory is that a comet or a meteor exploded in mid-air. This was the leading theory for many years, and it makes sense considering that comets and meteors have been known to explode on impact before. However, there are a couple of problems with this theory. First, there were no known comets in the area at the time. Second, the explosion was far too powerful to have been caused by a meteorite of any size. In fact, if a meteorite that big had hit the Earth today, it would have been much more destructive than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Another theory is that a fragment of an asteroid struck the Earth. If this was true, then a piece of space rock must have landed somewhere, so scientists set out to find the crater. They scoured the area for signs of a large-scale impact event, but they came up empty-handed. There were no rocks, no dust, no debris, nothing. It was as if the explosion had just evaporated the land. Years went by, and the mystery only grew. People began to speculate that the explosion was caused by a black hole, a miniature black hole, that is. Some scientists even suggested that aliens were responsible. But as time passed, reason prevailed and most people stopped believing in aliens. Okay, maybe they didn't stop believing in aliens, but they did start believing that the explosion wasn't caused by aliens. But still, what actually caused the Tunguska event? One thing's for sure, it was something big, something incredibly powerful that devastated the surrounding area. Trees were blown over in every direction. The trunks were stripped of their branches and leaves and turned into kindling. The roots were torn from the ground and thrown for miles, and the smaller trees were completely obliterated. And while it didn't level entire cities, its power shouldn't be underestimated. Houses and other buildings were damaged within 125 miles of the blast. And if it had hit a city instead of a forest, millions could have died. For a long time, the Tunguska event was considered to be the largest human-made explosion in history. That is, until we discovered that the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima was even more powerful. Still, the Tunguska event is pretty amazing. It remains the biggest explosion in recent history, bigger than anything humans have ever done or even come close to doing. And yet, despite its power, we still don't know exactly what caused it. What we do know is that it left behind some valuable clues, and if we can uncover them, they could help us better understand the world around us and the dangers posed by cosmic objects. Because whatever caused the Tunguska explosion is still out there somewhere, hurtling through space, possibly on a collision course with Earth. We're not saying that it's the end of the world, but if we don't learn from events like Tunguska, then who knows what might happen next. The Tunguska event was one of the most mysterious events of the 20th century. It remains the biggest explosion in recent history and one of the biggest mysteries of all time. So what really happened here? Well, we don't know for sure, but that hasn't stopped people from trying to find out. In the years since the Tunguska explosion, scientists have come up with all sorts of theories to try to explain what happened. But none of them have been able to explain all of the evidence. For example, there's the comet theory. As we mentioned earlier, scientists believe that a comet may have exploded in midair over Siberia. This would explain why there was no crater. Comets are made of ice and dust, which would have vaporized on impact. But there are a few problems with this theory. First, there were no known comets in the area at the time. Second, the explosion was far too powerful to have been caused by a meteorite of any size. In fact, if a meteorite that big had hit the Earth today, it would have been much more destructive than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Another popular theory is that a fragment of an asteroid struck the Earth. If this was true, then a piece of space rock must have landed somewhere. So scientists set out to find the crater. They scoured the area for signs of a large-scale impact event, but they came up empty-handed. There were no rocks, no dust, no debris, nothing. It was as if the explosion had just evaporated the land. Still, scientists haven't given up. They've continued to search for answers, poring over old documents and talking to anyone who might have seen something, heard something, or felt something. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from the trees themselves. When the explosion occurred, it created a shock wave that flattened trees in a radial pattern for dozens of square miles. This kind of damage is similar to what happens when a bomb explodes, except there was no bomb. Whatever caused the Tunguska explosion must have detonated in midair, releasing an enormous amount of energy that blasted out in all directions. In the years since the explosion, scientists have used computer models to try to recreate what happened. They've simulated different scenarios, trying to find one that matches all of the available evidence. But so far, they haven't been able to come up with a definitive answer. That's why the Tunguska explosion remains one of the biggest mysteries of all time. Maybe it'll remain unsolved forever. Maybe we'll never know what really happened here. But one thing's for sure, whatever it was something incredibly powerful. It released an energy equivalent to between 10 and 30 of the energy of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. And while it didn't hit a major city, it could have. If the Tunguska explosion had happened today, it would have been catastrophic. Cities for miles around would have been wiped off the map. Millions of people could have died. It's a scary thought, but it's one that's kept scientists up at night for decades. What if something like this happened again? What if another comet or asteroid was hurtling towards Earth? Could we be prepared? Or would we be caught off guard once again? The Tunguska event is a reminder of the awesome power of nature. It's a force that we can't control, a force that we can't predict, and a force that we can't stop. It's also a reminder of the fragility of life. We're just a small step away from disaster, and it only takes one event to change everything. In the years since the Tunguska Explosion, we've learned a lot about the world around us. We've developed new technologies that allow us to track objects in space and predict their trajectory. We've created systems to warn us of potential impacts and to help us prepare, but we can't be complacent. We can't afford to sit back and relax, because while we may have learned a lot since 1908, there's still so much we don't know. The Tunguska event is a reminder that we should never stop learning, that we should never stop exploring, and that we should never stop pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. Because who knows what we might find out next? Maybe we'll discover a new world, or maybe we'll discover something even more amazing. But one thing's for sure, it'll be a discovery that changes everything.